Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk this afternoon. My name is Benjamin Groth. I'm with Arc Impact. You might not recognize the name, but you'll probably recognize the equipment. We're sort of the rebirth of desktop metal. And today I'm going to talk about binder jetting of advanced ceramics, some capabilities, some limitations, what we see in the future. I'll have a couple sort of mature case studies, somewhat of a research scale, and just sort of a developmental bit of information. I've got here sort of an overview of AM technologies. If anyone was at Hall A6 yesterday, there was a talk by D3 where the speaker put up an image of some trees, and she made a very good metaphor that really resonated with me on the sort of differences in the trees and some bearing fruit, some being tall and good for building buildings when you cut them down. And I agree with that statement quite a bit in terms of there's all sorts of different AM technologies, and they all have their place. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. At the end of the day, there's not one that is all-encompassing. You need a couple different technologies out there to push the others, but to also sort of find your niche or find your real effective manufacturing technique. That being said, I'm going to talk about some of the advantages of binder jetting. This is a powder bed-based technology. We're not using paste or resins aside from the binder that you're putting down while you do your jetting. So there's no specific formulations you have to worry about. It's all in your powder, meaning it's all in your powder. So you have to have the right powders for the printing process. Again, it's powder-based, so you can use the same powders. If you're here this morning for Mona's talk from Chimera, she went through some of the powders available. You have Washington Mills right over here. They have powders available. All those powders in those traditional methods are usable within binder jetting technology. When it comes to the post-processing, you have the same methods available with a little bit of an asterisk as in traditional processing techniques. And we'll get into that. Fundamentally, you can process binder jetted parts in the same way as other traditional techniques with some caveats. So if you're not familiar with binder jetting technology, as I mentioned, it's a powder bed-based additive technique where you start with a digital file of some sort, a step file, an STL, some model of your desired geometry. We load that into the machine software. We do some slicing of that geometry to build layer by layer. We prep the machine itself with the powders and the binders that we want to use. We set up the printing parameters that we want to use, and then we hit go. And when we do that, we put down a powder layer. We add liquid binder in a predetermined specification where to drop it. We lower that down. We put more powder. We repeat until we've built up all of our layers, and we have our finished print. That is then taken out of the machine, sent off to curing. Once it's cured, we depowder. Once it's depowdered, we put it in for our post-processing. Usually a debind and sinter, but there's multiple techniques available for your post-processing. So why binder jetting, and where do we see it used most? Well, binder jetting in general is very useful on the research scale where you want to look at a multitude of material systems and you want to really start developing either disruptive technologies or look at what's available or what's possible with different material systems. And on the research scale, this is a very, very good system, very easy to work with system or technique that can get you good data quite readily. It's also highly scalable, so you can take that research scale knowledge and jump it up to production levels with the right equipment, and I'll show you some of what we have available. But you can go from research to production with very little additional development needed. I've got here, there are sort of 5 key factors. I want to focus on 2 of them. Number 1, wide material flexibility. Not just the powder sizes, but the materials that you can print are quite vast. There's almost no limit to what you can print with binder jetting out of manufacturing. And again, the number 4 there, the scalability. Being able to go from a research scale to production is quite useful within the same family of machines. And of course, you do have some economic advantages. You can process quite quickly, depending on your powder that you're using and the material type that you're using. And on our machines, there's quite a bit of control in the process, which also means there can be quite a bit of non-control, depending on how knowledgeable you are and how many knobs you try and turn. Again, material flexibility. Most people here are probably interested in that blue circle on the ceramic side, but the machines themselves are pretty agnostic to the material system. We can do metal powders, we can do ceramics on the same machine, not at the same time. I would not advise that, unless that's what you're looking to do, is have a composite material. But you can jump between materials as you wish. We also offer quite a few binders. Aquafuse and Fluid Fuse are similar binders with different dispersion aids and bases. One is solvent-based, one is aqueous-based. Same idea for the binder. Moderate carbon content on those. Phenol Fuse is a high carbon binder that we typically see with carbide systems where you want a bit of excess carbon or where you want actually a little bit more strength. Phenolic resins tend to be a little bit stronger than these others. They're thermosetting, so you have, once it's cured, it's good to go. We have Clean Fuse, which is opposite end of that spectrum, very low carbon yield. That's good typically for metal systems. We haven't really played with it too much on ceramics, but it's pretty decent on the metal side. And then Turbo Fuse is something, again, we've used more on the metal side, but it's a nanoparticle containing binder where we can tailor what those particles are and maybe get some better results on ceramic materials or more specified particles for a specific ceramic system. As I mentioned, we have the sort of R&D scale machine, our Innovent X. It's regularly quoted in scientific papers. Typically, if you're searching binder jetting, the researchers are using an Innovent machine. It's not always the case, but that's been around long enough that it's developed quite a reputation as a good research tool. That tool does scale. We have the X25 Pro and the X160 Pro, 25 liter, 160 liter build volumes. 25 Pro is 400 by 250 by 250 millimeter available build bed. The X160 is 800 by 500 by 400. So those are that's the available space that you have for printing. So size and quantity are both available on that largest platform. So binder jetting, as well as these other additive techniques, it's really about finding innovative solutions, ideally using complex geometries, but you can print a block if you want to of material and work with that. But where it really excels is your geometry complexity. Some of the application spaces that we've seen for ceramics, I split these up into carbides and then oxides, borides, really other. The bulk of what you'd see out there, and what probably you people have seen as you walk around the venue, on the carbide side are these siliconized silicon carbide mirrors, heat exchangers, items for semiconductor handling and applications, body armors. And you see some of that also on the oxide and boride side, just different end use, but still same space for those systems. And these are all application spaces that we've had customers or we've had people inquire about and try to use binder jetting for. So again, why binder jetting for ceramics? Material flexibility. You can look at carbide systems, boron carbide and silicon carbide, great in the armor space, great in the optic space. Boron carbide for neutron applications also. You can look at oxide systems, alumina, zirconia, silica are ones that we've looked at. Carbon and graphite, just pure C. Printing with that is feasible. Some more unique systems in the nitride space and your UHTCs, your diborides, are all printable on these systems. And then some of those sort of oddities, your titanates, your piezos, moon dust, simulated regolith, coffee grounds. These are all things that we've been asked to print and have successfully printed. What you want to do with it afterwards, if you're printing coffee grounds, is up to you. But that's something that is possible. Fundamentally, if you can get it into a flowable form, chances are you can print it. If you can't get it into a flowable form, chances are we can make it print. You just might not get the end result that you're looking for. So one of the sort of more mature systems out there, and again, what you've probably seen as you walked around the conference hall, are these silicon carbide parts. This is the back of a optical mirror. And when you're printing silicon carbide, you're printing silicon carbide, but you're actually ending up with some sort of composite in the form of siliconized silicon carbide, where your silicon carbide percent can vary based off of your processing, both your print processing and your post-processing. And typically you'll see up to 93 volume percent silicon carbide, where you're filling in the rest of that porosity with the silicon. You're using that as a filler to show that you're 100% dense. In the bottom here, I have a couple properties from one version of siliconized silicon carbide. This is off a paper out of Oak Ridge National Lab in the States, where they were looking at a very specific powder cut and very specific infiltration parameters and varying those parameters to see how it affects the properties, but also the infiltratability of the part. On a more sort of mature side, and this is a user of both the X25 and the X160 Pro systems. They've been around doing this for quite some time. They've got a very solid set of properties that they've developed. These are all at room temperature. But for their process, for their system, they see about 85, 90 volume percent silicon carbide, and these are the properties that they're seeing from that. These are the types of parts that they would produce. The bottom right there is probably something on the size order of what you do on the 25 Pro if you're not doing quantity. This big parts on the top left are something that you'd want to print on the 160 and could do that quite easily and quite readily. Something sort of on the research scale, I had mentioned these UHT ceramics, ultra high temperature, things like diborides for hypersonics. The powders themselves can be a bit tricky to print. They tend to be very cohesive. You need to either add flow aids or a quantity of sintering aids to get them to dispense, but then also densify. But typically flow aids are carbon-containing elements that might not be good for the sintering, and the sintering aids you might have to add in a quantity that you don't want, but gets the job done. So in this case, what we were looking at, what the partner company was looking at was titanium diboride. It was actually a titanium diboride nickel system where they were having a very tough time producing unique geometries in any other way. So we said, okay, give us some powder, we'll print, we'll see what we can do. Went through a couple iterations of that printing and that post-processing, and they were able to get greater than 97% density on some parts. Some more tuning, they were able to do so without great deformation. This was sort of an early iteration where they was getting some deformation in the z-axis, but with proper containment and proper sintering setup, they were able to minimize that distortion. One thing that I'll say binder jetting struggles with is to an extent, some of these oxide ceramics, they're highly printable. You get good resolutions, you get crisp parts, but due to powder limitations, you might not get the densities that you like. That's in development. That's something that we've got multiple customers looking at and working on the research scale, trying to fully densify. Certainly, out of a material jetting, you might get some very good, very crisp parts that are fully dense, but you're currently not going to have the quantity production or the scale production that you'd want, or that you could want out of an alumina material from those techniques. So why aren't we seeing much more beyond this sort of siliconized silicon carbide space? And why aren't we seeing that really beyond the research scale? And it's the post-processing. It's what do you have to do with the parts once you have them out of the curing oven? How do you take that to a finished product? And in some of these other additive techniques where you either have very high solids loading because you have a paste where you can jam a bunch of particles in there, or have very high concentration of submicron particles that want to densify, that promote densification, you can take those and you can directly sinter. It might take a couple days to densify, but you can encourage that. But on the binder jetting side, there's just you're currently particle limited by what those particle sizes are and what's printable. So you have to look at other techniques. SPS has been recently quite effective at fully densifying silicon carbide. You can get away with some pressureless sintering depending on the material system that you're looking at and what sintering aids you have in there. Or you do some sort of infiltration process like the siliconized silicon carbide. So what's the future really? You've seen all of these siliconized silicon carbide parts. You've seen them for optics. You've seen them for maybe burner applications. What else can we use that for? Who's seen these pieces thinks, oh, I don't want that technology. That's not what I'm using. That's what I'm interested in. But maybe the part performance fits for your application. You just haven't thought of that as an opportunity. So where's the interest? Where can we more broadly apply that type of material? As I mentioned, SPS or field-assisted sintering has proven pretty effective in the last couple of years. I've got some images over here of silicon carbide, pure silicon carbide, that has been densified to greater than 99.9%. You can see there's a little bit of distortion still. Nothing you can't work out with proper optimization and design. We've had similar effect in boron carbide systems with a small weight percent of sintering aid. We're able to get 100% dense on similarly complex shapes. That's currently limited by size. As furnace developers increase their capabilities and their designs, we can get larger and larger parts out of the SPS process. We've seen similar promise out of nitride systems, and with the proper support media, you can probably see some good advancements in oxide systems. And so I'd like to end that with, if you have a process or a product that you'd like to explore as an AM part, we'd like to help. ARC would like to assist. Come find us in A6216, and we'd love to talk to you.